Hi, I'm Steve Schwarz. I'm a software developer. I've been doing software since the early 90s, so a long, long time ago. And this presentation was really for the other Mark who isn't actually here. Because during my last month's presentation, I was talking about offline first and using replication to share a local data store, like in your browser, with the server, and just having them magically all sync back and forth. So you know, if you don't have network connectivity, you could just keep working. So it all just saves in the browser store, and then when the network finally connects up, the magic happens. You know, and it resynchronizes with the server, and your data is magically saved on the server.
It's not a trivial problem.
It's not a trivial problem. And so I was looking for a simple example, and Peter Banugo had this nice article using technology that I'm using for a project, for my Ionic project, which is PouchDB, which is a JavaScript-only local storage that supports full sync to data stores like Couchbase. So key value stores, no SQL databases, basically, like Couchbase, Cloud, and
Mongo.
Not Mongo, Couchbase Server. The three ones I named, they all share the same replication protocol. So there's this semi-standard replication protocol that PouchDB also knows about. So you can use any of these three backends, and they all know how to sync. So, and it's really a cool little project. So
not based on PouchDB.
It's all based on CouchDB, exactly. CouchDB kind of came up with this protocol, and everyone said, "This is awesome. Let's do this replication thing." So Pouch is you go to PouchDB.com. That's the only thing you need to know, and it's the database that syncs. It's all JavaScript, which is why I'm here talking about it, because we're all about the JavaScript. And you can see that just to give a simple example, I'll show you Peter's code that I've made a few changes to. But basically, you new up a local database, then you can post or put. You give it an ID just like you would a SQL ID, or if you use the db.post, it generates a unique ID for you. You give it the data, key values you want to store, and then if you want to keep track of stuff in real time as they're changing, either by you or by someone else on the same database, right? It could be you and I, or you're logged in somewhere, I'm logged in somewhere, we're both editing the same data store. I would then be able to use the simple call to get a callback anytime there's a change that you make or that I make.
We play chess against each other and then store our game on the server later.
Yes, and come back to it.
So you're subscribing to
this database. Like you can connect to multiple databases if you wanted and sync them in all sorts of crazy ways, but we're going to keep it very simple. And then you can say, hey, you can do single direction replication. So if you have like a master read-only database and you always want to pull down, you could replicate in one direction, or you can do bidirectional synchronization. So let's look at the example app. Is basically, I've got the console open here, but it's basically a contact manager kind of thing that he came up with. So it's Steve, right? So it's a classic thing. It's just a simple app that stores data and replicates it. So let's look at his code. And the reason I picked this one is it's nothing fancy. It's jQuery, Bootstrap. Like, you're all going to see this code and you're like, I get this code. It's going to be you're going to be so happy. So basically, he's just doing in the HTML. Here's a little nav bar. Here's our contact form, right? And it's got each of the fields: name, mobile, right? And then he's got the table below it, which has got. It's really hard. It's really hard for me to see my own cursor with this. But it's got the title. So let's look at the code. That's the more interesting part. So in the code itself, just got an anonymous function that jQuery is going to fire off when it inits. So we new up a database called Example, and then just to give you an overview of the functions. When he submits it, we're going to call. There's a function that says, "Hey, when you click the submit button, we're going to call into here." Then we add a contact, delete a contact, load all the contacts, and then we set up a listener for clicks on the delete. And then here's that change method I showed you from the PouchDB example. I'll drill into this so you'll make more sense, but basically you say, when stuff is added, we're going to call process change. Process change. And then later on, and then when the app first starts up, we just load the contacts. Right, so the first thing is it's not doing any syncing. The first version I'll show you is we basically fire this thing up, we load the contacts, of which there are 0, and then we just start adding them from there. So let's break down the code a little
So
bit.
this isn't connecting to anything yet?
Not yet. We're just going to work all local for a few minutes, and then we'll sync. So we'll see how it works. So to add a contact, right, this is like old, crufty, this is how we used to do it code. This is why I love this code. So you hand in a record, and you make some HTML, and you blast it into the T-body of the table, right? So this, everybody with me? It's all pretty straightforward. The only sneaky thing I'm doing is I added a data ID in here to keep track of the ID, so I can use it later for deleting. That's because Peter didn't have delete in his example, but I thought it'd be more interesting to just delete. So when we go to delete a contact, we get an ID, and we say, so we go out and get it. You can do removes just with IDs, but I lied to you a little bit. You can't just do a delete with an ID. Every object when you start has an ID and a revision. Because it could be that I haven't connected to the server in a long, long time. So I think revision 1 is the latest version. But meanwhile, you've been editing this same ID over and over, and the server's on revision 5000. So the server has to, for you to delete something or update something, it needs to know ID and rev, and that's where the magic all occurs. But I'm not gonna go through how that all works because I don't really understand it. I just use it. I'm trusting. They say the conflict resolution is deterministic. So, okay, I guess that's good. I don't know which way it goes. Like, I think, to be honest, I think you can say use by date or use by rev, and most people just say choose by rev. Because if you were able to get to the server, you're more definitive than me who couldn't get to the server. I think it's their model, right? If I was able to get a revision update on the server, I should win over you who stayed disconnected and are still working on an old rev. You could argue date is the better. So another function, so let's load stuff. I probably should have started here. So you go to the store and you say, hey, dude, call all the docs and include docs. There may be situations where all you want is the IDs, which I've never found a use for, but I haven't used this that much. So I always want all the docs. It returns a promise. So you get back the contacts, and the first thing he does is he whacks out the table, and then he iterates over all the rows in the data that comes back and calls our pal add contact, which writes a TRTD, squirts them all out. So that's how he loads up the table. And then, so that would be good enough to get everything done, right? Except adding a record, where's my other dude here? Oh, so when we submit, this is the piece you were missing. You press that submit button. Basically, it goes our classic jQuery stuff, right? Go to each input, grab the value out of each one, then go to the store, create an object. I wish I could see my cursor better. Add an object and just push those all in and smash it into the database. And then he clears out the actual form. But you see here, he's not actually updating the table, right? He just pushed it into the database. So one way you could code this would be that this function would call our pal add contract. But instead, what he does, which makes a lot more sense, is to use this changes function here. So this basically says, hey database, anytime there's a change, so connect up, give me live updates, include the docs, and if you ever see a change, call our pal process change. So this gets called both locally and remotely, right? So when we do finally connect up to the server, if there's a change that comes through live, it's going to call this function and process it, just as if you press the submit button to add a guy. You with me? So, right, so when we call, let's back up.
Does this wait for a round trip? So if you post to the store, will it post first and come back and say it changed? Or will it just immediately trigger change?
It'll immediately trigger off the local change, and then the replication is like a background thread. It isn't really a thread, but it's.
What if you're in the middle of modifying that item while a change happens on the server?
What do you want to have happen?
So
Right, I mean, it's really your call. So
Yeah.
you could choose to not process it,
Yeah.
or you could, what I would do is process it and say,
So you'd have to probably maintain a state of, oh, I'm editing right now, and then handle
Right.
it accordingly.
Right. And in this high-tech app, he just ignores it, right? He just doesn't
It's easier to do it for a safe conflict.
It just depends how much you care. So let's go back through the process just so you're all with me here. So they click submit, he puts it in the database. It does get written. It may get written to a remote server if we're hooked up to a remote server. And then the changes callback calls process change. Process change comes in and says, hey, was it deleted? No, we just added it. So we call our add contract, which then updates the table. So we're not updating the table directly. We're updating the table when the database has seen the data. And that's not that critical when we're just clicking submit, but it's going to matter when we hook up remotely. So let's play with this app a little more. So here I've got a dude, right? I've put Steve in there. I've got another incognito guy here. Let's put Joe in here, right? Right, they're not syncing, right? They all have they have separate databases for each other. They're in their own little worlds, right? I'm offline first, I'm refreshing them. It's all stored, it's all happy, right? I'll refresh this guy which times.
So is it just using locally?
It's using local storage, which thank you for the segue. That was awesome. Because I forgot to show you this part. That was the important thing.
I mean, it could be using IndexedDB, right?
Let me make this bigger so I can see what I'm doing here. Okay. Where is that stored again? I keep forgetting. Here we go. So under applications,
Yeah.
it's
Right there, under.
it should be under IndexedDB though. That's why I'm a little confused. Oh, did I clear my database when I was monkeying around? No, he's still there. So it should be under IndexedDB. It could be that this guy got confused. I've seen that happen a few times where it doesn't refresh. So there you'll see it's created a PouchDB Example database, because that was what I named that database when I called you on it. And it's got one object in it, and there she blows, right? So it just stores it, and you can see it's got this rev ID. That's that revision number I was talking about.
That's abstracted from, you don't have to worry about.
You don't have to worry about that, but you have access to it.
So
You can have your own revision naming scheme if you want to do. Same thing with IDs. Since it's just like most NoSQL things, you can give it an ID that's meaningful to you to make the queries over the index sweet, so you don't need to have extra indices.
So do you know, does it have like a dependency on something like local forage?
I think it uses local forage.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been done everything I've needed to do, so I have not had to dive under the covers at all. And that is a testament, because it seems every piece of open source software I use, I'm like, oh, I've got to create a PR to fix this. But you learn a lot when you do that, so stand on the shoulders of giants. So yeah, so there's a bunch of internal tables that it uses to keep track of all this stuff. So let's get that out. So let's now make this more interesting, right? So let's, gosh, where's my cursor? So now the piece I had undone, so now the other thing you can do when it starts up, right? So when I call load contacts, it returns a promise, because it's going to load all the data, and then it just returns, just returns a promise. So when it's done loading all this data, I say, hey, let's sync with this local database, keep it up to date, and if it's not there, keep retrying. It has an automatic back off policy, so it'll try and then delay a second, and then delay 2 seconds. And
So what's behind that endpoint? Is that Pouch or is that Couch?
Let's look and see.
All right.
You guys are awesome. So I'm using Sync Gateway, which is Couchbase Server. This guy here. So here's I should have shown you this picture. So here's CouchDB is what started it all. This is all Apache, so it's freeware. It's nice. You just need your own server to host it. And you see that they're touting their replication protocol, which is what makes us all play together. For my purpose, and Peter, who did this example, he uses Couchbase. Typically when you do these apps, at least this is my new understanding, because I'm not an expert in this field, is a lot of times you'll have a database per user. That's typically how this spins up. I came from old school SQL days where you had some big iron and everyone shared a big database server, right? That's how it works. Apparently in the NoSQL world, if you don't need to share data across users, it's actually the cool kids just spin up a separate instance on the server for each person. And they're so cheap to run that, yeah, it's okay to have 100,000 back-end database servers. And it just works. And it's just like sharding, right? You're sharding by user. So you can spin it across a gajillion servers and it scales by users, right? In the app I'm working on, I'm using Couchbase, which uses a single backend database, because a feature of an app I'm working on is there's a lot of sharing across users. So it made more sense to store all the data in one server. And they use this thing, so there's the Couchbase server, and sitting in front of it is called Sync Gateway. And what Sync Gateway does is it has rules that say, you're allowed to see Steve's post, you're not allowed to see Steve's post. And you can define rules that are dynamically say, you get everything because you're an admin, you get nothing because you're a brand new user, or you only get your data. And so this Sync Gateway kind of acts as a pretend, well, it's a, that's what I'm looking for. It's kind of like it's a multiplexer that's sitting in front of one big database. So it looks to most users just like CouchDB, which might have one database per user. So that was a very long digression. What I've done is the original example spun up PouchDB. You installed it locally, but I'm all about Docker lately. So I created a Docker config file to fire this up.
Database in Docker?
Sure.
Crazy.
Everything
In Docker.
Everything.
Well, I'm using Docker. I mean, I love that. I get
So this is running Sync Gateway, Couchbase Sync Gateway. You could pretend it's just the database. It's running in a mode where if I restart it, it loses all the data, because it's a stupid example. We don't care, right? Did you have a question?
So you said the backend database, you have to, so does it mean you can actually be running some relational database in backend, and then you just use that as like a...
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's still a NoSQL database.
Oh.
So Sync Gateway only knows how to work with Couchbase server.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not that generic, unfortunately. So I'm just running this locally, and so if there's my app. If I reload this guy, we should see some traffic probably that some records came through. So the server hopefully has been updated. Let's reload our incognito guy, right? He still just has Joe in him. If I reload him to the code that knows about syncing, nothing happens. It's so awesome. Why didn't that sync? It should have synced. Sure. It's because of the purple color. Maybe I didn't save it. That's the real reason it didn't work. Come on, save. So now let's really reload it. So that still has me. Now I'll reload this guy. Localhost. Why are you waiting for localhost?
The VPF you got there. It's a lot.
Snappy.
I'm running, what the hell? It's localhost, how could it not be working? Connecting.
Anything in your network tab?
That's so bizarre. Let's just reload.
Multiple Docker containers.
No.
Yeah.
Do you have the right network pointed between the two of them?
Unless it worked at home, maybe something different is happening here. So I can't be reached. Here's my dude. Wow. Not one stop. Try it again. Well, this isn't going to be much of a demo if I can't actually sync between them. That's pretty stupid. Yeah, it's like it's not on the same network.
What'd you say about running in Docker again, Joe? Everything in Docker. Docker
Everything
and
in
Docker.
Docker.
About that?
Can I blame Joe somehow?
The way the world works.
Well, I'll give you one more try. I'll shut
But,
that down.
I mean, you'd be really emo, vagrant, all vagrant.
Still exist?
Vagrant? It's
Wow, I think you might be right in that it loads it when it's not running sync gateway. What data? What? Oh, he's on 127, not localhost. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's the same thing, isn't it?
No, it
You
isn't.
didn't put
You
it-
missed a dot.
Yep, and I would have been surprised like 5 minutes from now when it didn't work. It may still not work.
You're gonna post on the meetup board like 2 o'clock in the morning. I figured it out!
Well, I don't like to look like an idiot.
Shows
I mean,
goddamn
I look like one,
HDMI
but I'm
bugs.
Okay, so these guys are running.
Moment of truth.
Okay. Interestingly, they have no data because they're on a different network now. Apparently, how local
Spawned
storage
in the
works.
database.
The last thing I need to do is this guy is listening on localhost also. So this is the config file for sync gateway.
You have
You're
it
wondering.
on.
Did I do it again?
You did a bunch of weird stuff that time.
There you
Okay, he's running. You stop running because you're running the wrong version.
go. I love how you're making this relatable.
Yeah. Take your time,
Okay,
Steve.
so it printed out more interesting stuff. Let's look at our log real quickly and see if the console. This I love this. Don't you love this? This 404 is totally normal. When I first saw this with Couchbase, I'm like, no. But so failed loading. I'm a little worried. Let's try saving something here. Ooh. Yes.
Ooh.
Okay, so we'll add him over. Let's add Joe over here. Fine. So it did that by bouncing them through the server, right? So long story short. Remember way back when we were talking about replicating? That's what replication looks like. So what actually happened in the code, and then I promise I will be done, is we saved it locally. Each guy then synchronized with the remote sync gateway. It fired this on change callback on each one with the new change. So the guy who saved it got the callback to update himself. And the other guy, who was just minding his own business, got the callback that said, here's the new data, and he updated himself also. So it's a similar thing. I should be able to kill this guy, add Fred, and Susie, and in theory, I have to remember me. Boom, right, so it gets them all. It's fast, it's really fast. They're not just running all local, so it's very fast anyway. So that's PouchDB showing how synchronization works. You see the code was dead simple. JavaScript, there's really no magic involved. And I found it to be really stable, and it's all open source. It's awesome. Thanks everybody. Thanks for bearing with me. That's a little debugging on the fly. Oh, do I need to press something, Joe? Or should I not touch it?
Yeah, if it's flashing red, go ahead and press it down. Steve, do you know what it's using to cause that sync in the, so you made the change in one browser and I saw the other one update. Is it using like WebSockets? Or
Long pull.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It detects whatever you've got and downgrades as far as it has to go to get a WebSocket effectively. But on Chrome here, for whatever reason, it's using long pull on on this version of it.
So
It works.
it would otherwise use WebSocket. Okay.
I think so. I didn't, like I said, works for me. Not looking under the covers, just trusting. I have enough things I have to understand, so far it's working.
Cool.
Great, thanks. Steve.
Cool. Thank you, Steve.